Okay, so I decided to do my presentation on 8-bit music, but sometimes it's called chiptune. But we can move on to the next slide. So basically what chiptune music is, or 8-bit music, is that it's music that's made using programmable sound generators. And what kind of makes it different is that the nostalgic factor that comes from that electronic or synthesizer sound. And it's most prevalent in old video game consoles, old arcade machines, and like vintage computers. We can move on to the next slide. So the main target audience for this genre of music, I would say, split it up between two groups, and that's adults who grew up in the 80s or 90s, and just a few, couple of 2000s kids. But not only because of the genre's like enjoyable soundtrack and catchy tunes, but for the older audience, it would be for like the nostalgia factor and like unlocking old memories, and like it's tied to their love for a video game or something. But for a newer audience, I'd say it's more like it's for the uniqueness of the sound, and also maybe it's tied to like their love for a franchise. Like if a younger person likes Mario games, a big part of the franchise is the older music, and that's kind of where it began. So that's what would give them that appeal, and also maybe a younger audience just likes to explore older games. But we can move on to the next slide. Uh, I wouldn't really use the word mainstream to describe this type of music, but it does have a lot of mainstream influence in film, in film, music, and video games. Like 8-bit music was used in like Wreck-It Ralph, a very popular film, both movies. And these are mainstream video games. I just pulled three from Nintendo's biggest franchises. They don't use 8-bit music anymore, but they used to, and that's like a big part of their music. And also, 8-bit music influenced a lot of more electronic kinds of music. So we can move on to the next slide. Um, so chiptune music kind of began um, around the 1970s to 1980s, but the best estimate that we have is that it began in 1975. And the reason why the music exists is because older consoles couldn't play back full MP3 recordings like um, the modern devices that we have now. So they just generated music through simple waveforms using those programmable sound generators. And probably the first instance of music being used in a video game or in like a game over screen being used in a video game is Tomohiro Nishikado's Gunfight. It's an arcade game. There's a video of it right here, but it's not really that interesting of a video, and the music isn't really that good. Oh yeah, we can play a little bit of it. So yeah, that's the music. Yeah, that's all that happens. So we can kind of just stop watching because that's really all it is. Yeah. So that's where video game music started. Not really an impressive start, but we all have to start somewhere. So we can move on to the next slide. So um, just to talk about how the music works. So I'm just going to use the Nintendo hardware as an example from this point on because that's what I decided to focus on. But the Game Boy hardware had four voice polyphony, which means it could only produce four different notes at a time, but really it's more three notes because the fourth note is just percussion, really. So you can see the four voices right here, pulse one, pulse two, and then wave and noise is what they're called. So voice one and two could only produce pulse-shaped waves, so they're not really versatile in the sound that they can make, the already limited sound that they can make. Voice three was more versatile in the sense that it could produce different shapes in its waveforms, and voice four could only make sounds, which is why it's called noise, and it's really only used for percussion. So when it comes to 8-bit music, at least in the Game Boy hardware, the most you could play was three notes at a time. So you have already a limited amount of options, but it's even further limited by the fact that you can only play three voices at a time. So the way they worked around this, we can move on to the next slide, is through musical texture. So in music, there's two different types of texture called counterpoint and homophony. Counterpoint comes from Latin. Basically, it's against and note, which means that the notes are kind of countering each other. They're going against each other. And homophony is it's the same sound. So two different notes that we perceive as one sound. So basically, counterpoint music is music that's consists of three different melodies that are three independent melodies that are technically going against each other, but the way we perceive it is that they're forming like one overarching melody, whereas homophony is what usually our modern music is. It's music consisting of a melody and it's supported by chords, and it and even though they're different pitches, they're treated as one unified voice. So like a chord, like a C major chord, C, E, G, they're three different notes, C, E, and G. But when we hear them played at the same time, we only perceive one sound and one voice. So we can move on to the next slide. A few examples that I brought up for counterpoint and homophony are these two songs from Pokemon. So if we look at the sheet music at the bottom, we can see that the most amount of notes that are playing at once are three. It can't go past more than three notes. So all three lines have their own different kind of melody. They're all kind of doing their own thing. The top line is still kind of the main voice, but the bottom line kind of supports that using arpeggios. So since we can't play more than three notes at a time, what we can do is we can just split up each chord into multiple different notes using arpeggios, and then the bottom is just kind of there to support it. Whereas in Eterna Forest, and this is when the hardware started to get better, so they could play more than just three notes at a time. You can see that they start using chords. But we can click that link and listen to how the three different melodies interact with each other. Probably, I think, like 30 seconds of that. Okay, I think that's good. So yeah, so you could kind of hear. Could you guys hear how it was? There was kind of three different things going on, but it sounded like it was just all happening at once. But yeah, this is an example of more homophonic music. Uh, yeah. Okay. We can stop it there. But so could you guys kind of hear? Yeah. Okay. So could you guys kind of hear how? Yeah. Could you guys kind of hear how there was three different notes playing at once? So yeah. Okay. Wait. Actually, can we go back to slide 6? I think real quick. I think. Can you go back one more slide? Yeah, that one. We can click. Can you click that video too? Because it just visualizes the different sound waves. So those are the top two voices, the third voice and the fourth voice. You can kind of see how this only plays percussion, but the three are really what's carrying it. Okay, I think that's good there too. Yeah, I just kind of showed it. Yeah. Okay, we can go to the slide that we were at before. So these are the three composers that I decided to pull up that I feel like really represent the genre the best. I just kind of pulled from Nintendo's three biggest IPs, Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda, and these are three of their biggest composers. So we have Koji Kondo, Junichi Masuda, and Go Ichinose. We can go to the next slide. A little bit about Koji Kondo is that he makes music for a lot of the Nintendo IPs, Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda, but also stuff like Super Smash Bros. And Star Fox. He had a couple nominations for Best Original Music and Best Original Soundtrack, and right now he's a Hall of Famer for the Academy of Arts and Sciences. We can go to the next slide. These are, if I could include a lot more, I would have, but if I were to like narrow it down for my top 5 best picks for his music, it would be these. If we go to the next slide, I think we can listen to one song that he made that still has a pretty popular melody even today. Whoa. Okay. Downstairs. Right? And then next slide. So that's a picture of Junichi Masuda when he was younger, but he's been working for the Pokemon franchise since the very beginning. He's directed or co-directed every Pokemon game since Crystal. He had like a lower office in the first three games. So but right now he's currently serving as the chief creative officer of the Pokemon company, but he's also really known for his compositions. He was the only composer for the first three games of Pokemon too. So we can go to the next slide. These are probably, if I were to narrow it down to five of my personal best picks for his music, would be these. The next slide is just an example of one of these. This is another melody that I feel like a lot of people know. Yeah, okay. I think we can stop it there because I'm pretty sure everybody knows how that goes at that point. Okay. And lastly, this is probably out of all the composers that I chose to represent the genre, he's probably the one that's known the least in the sense that he hasn't really made like music that people just instantly recognize. But if you're a fan of the franchise, you'll definitely recognize his music. He's been working for Game Freak since 1993. Um, he had a lower office, but he's been working as a full-time composer for a while now, and he's composed some of the most memorable Pokemon music. And if you go to the next slide, uh, yeah, these are my top five favorite picks for his music. If I could pick more, I would, but this is how I would narrow it down. But we can go to the next slide, and this one kind of takes a while to build up, but when the beat drops, it gets better. So I think we should. Can you skip it to like 40 seconds in? Yeah, like 40. Yeah, and then yeah. Okay, yeah, we can stop it there. But yeah, you can kind of hear how they really make good use of the three voices that they can play at a time. We can move on to the next slide. Uh, So yeah, this is just the last slide that I added in last minute. But we listen to a lot of like 8-bit music, like the Zelda and the Pokemon melody, for example. We know what they sound like in the 8-bit, but they're also still melodies used today in more homophonic textures. So I just added an example of more modern music that's put in an 8-bit sound font. But just for the sake of time, I think we just skip that over and go to the last slide. I think it's the last slide. Oh, I just started playing. Yeah. So the reason why I chose 8-bit music was because it's a genre that really inspires me because it was created not really um, for any creative reason, but it was born out of necessity. They had a lot of limitations they had to work with, and this was the best that they could do at the time. So the this genre's complexity is founded in its simplicity. It was so simple that it could only play three notes at a time, but um, they ended up making really complex music using the counterpoint texture. Um, and its greatness, it's found in its limitations. So what made it so limited, all of the limitations that it had, is what forced these composers to take it to new heights and like to be more creative and to just work with what they had. And when you listen to the music, it doesn't really sound like they were very limited in their options and the sounds that they can make, but the limitations is what forced them to like work around that and make good music in spite of that. So even though it's really more older music, it's considered to be older music now. It still leaves a legacy and it still leaves a mark in film, music, and video games. And it just has an unforgettable sound. When you hear it once, you can't really forget what it sounds like. And when you hear it just out of nowhere, you kind of just instantly recognize what it's from. But also, it's just great music to listen to at all times because most of it is made for video games, and because of that, they kind of have to be like more ambient and background music, but at the same time, they have to be encouraging and not distracting. So it's just great to listen to all the time, and just how limited it is and how great it became in spite of that is why I chose this genre. If we go to the last slide, it's just the sources that I used. But yeah, that's it. Uh, anyway, yeah, David. Um, well, I think Mario has more music, but if I were to listen to just if I were to just pick one to listen to, I'd just pick the Zelda game. I would. It's my in my opinion, it is. Yeah. Okay.
Other questions? Blake, Edgar, Booker, do you have any statements, questions?
I think Cooper has a question
Oh, go
up
ahead,
front.
Cooper. Favorite Pokemon song?
Um,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, I know, but you
Yeah, it has a list. I don't know. It changes like a lot. David. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Black on black.
it is Mickey Mouse.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. Awesome
Okay.
content. Great job.
All right.
Let's give a round of applause.